Wide Angle Conversations, DEI Talks, an initiative of Life by Design with Taruna Aggarwal. Raising awareness about the importance of diversity and inclusion and bringing to you insights and best practices from DEI advocates and champions. Welcome to Wide Angle Conversations, DEI Talks. I'm Taruna Aggarwal and I'm in conversation with Nene Molefi. Nene is the CEO of Nene Molefi Consultants based out of South Africa. She is an author, thought leader, and a highly experienced consultant for diversity and inclusion, culture change, strategy development, and transformation. She regularly speaks at local and international conferences. She is also the co-author of the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmarks 2021 and a board member of the Center for Global Inclusion. Hi, Nene. Welcome to Wide Angle Conversations DEI Talks.
Thank you, and good morning, Taruna. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Nene. Nene, I was just mentioning that you have written a book. You've just authored a book, A Journey of Diversity and Inclusion in South Africa. Tell us a little bit about the book, the inspiration behind it, and the purpose for writing the book.
Thanks for the book is inspired by the journey that personally I have traveled, being a practitioner of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also being an employee in organizations. What I felt was important, and just being a citizen of the globe. So what I thought was important was to document my own experiences and share with people who are either joining the journey, who want to be practitioners, or people who just want to understand the world of work. So it was really inspired by the challenges that I experienced personally, the sexism, the racism, whatever the isms that you can find there that I saw. And I always believe it's important to document our stories.
If you look at the journey of diversity and inclusion back in the 60s when it started off, but over the last 20 years or so, we've seen a lot of development, a lot of shifts happening in the area. And even before COVID started, I think from my experience, I think people were focusing more on, the representation models. So diversity trainings had become a norm. But, we know that alone doesn't work. As you also mentioned, it is inclusion that we should be talking more about. So from your experience of 25 years, what is it in our approach that is actually stopping us from making the progress that we should be making in this area?
Firstly, I think there's many things that are stopping us, but two that come out very clearly for me is our piecemeal approach to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I believe in calling it the DEI, but it's piecemeal approach, meaning people think exactly like you said, Taruna. People think that when you have taken participants through workshops, you have done the work. And while people will be excited and they will learn from the workshops, what is missing is a systemic approach to the work. So what after I've been through a workshop? So what if after you've sensitized me? If you are not giving me the tools, if you are not approaching it in a systemic manner, that learning will fizzle. Will just fizzle out in the air. So I think, the journey that I have seen and I've managed, and only because I've been at it for like 25 years, to see what actually works, that put in place a guided model. I've developed an iterative culture change model that will ensure that diversity and inclusion is embedded in your system. And what do I mean by a systemic approach is that workshops becomes only one of the many elements that you can put in place. Let me give you a practical example. When you want a sustainable approach to this, it's important to put in place, first of all, to have a team, a diverse team that you can work with, that is representative, so that this does not become the responsibility of an HR director or chief diversity officer only, or that. So put in place a team that will work and have the excitement together with you. If I'm the HR director internally, Or if I'm a consultant consulting for an organization, I can read a lot about that organization. I can never know it like people internally. Also, if I'm an internal chief diversity officer or HR director, I can put together a team where people are placed at different locations in an organization, different business units or divisions, that we can collectively co-create this culture that we are looking for. So you have a team that is representative. Another thing, you need to have a very good communication strategy, so that if you have managers all over the different provinces where you are based, or all over the different countries, if you are a global organization, they need to know that where are we with this process? Where are we even going? And then, most importantly, you need to do your survey, your focus groups, so that you know what are you solving for. Before you get to workshops, what are you solving for? Because different departments or divisions of business units will have their different challenges. Once you've done that, then very important to formulate a vision. Why are we doing this? Let's say I've joined your organization this month, and I hear that my company is busy with diversity and inclusion, and there isn't any statement that defines the why.
Yeah.
I'm still answering your question where we go wrong. There is no statement that defines the why. So once the senior leadership I've facilitated many sessions where I've helped the senior leadership to say, let us identify the why. Why do you even want to do this as a collective? But also, what is your personal why as an individual leader? So once people have come up with a statement that this is why, this is our ideal end state, this is our aspirational statement, after that, only then can you get to your workshops. Because, and why is important, then your workshops are talking to two things. You've got data points. One data point is the surveys that you've conducted. They will tell you where are the red flags, which divisions have more problems than the other, and what are types of problems there are. Others would have more gender slant, others would have more ethnicity and race, some would have more age. So you would have real data that you are working with. And then also another data point, remember, you would have defined your vision, that this is where we want to go. So when you enter into your workshops, the dialogues in the workshops are pointing towards that vision. That has been missing.
That has been missing. So I think it's what I'm hearing you say is that the main complexity is basically creating that safe space. That is important, the vulnerability of the leadership as well, to actually really know the why are we doing it, and connect to that. Right?
Yeah, and because I've spoken about those steps that you follow even before the workshops, very important that if you want a successful, constructive workshop that will be meaningful to people, you need to start with psychological safety, because we know that issues of diversity and inclusion can be emotive, and different countries have their pain points. In my country, the pain point is race and gender. In another country, religion could be a pain point. In another country, it could be age or a combination of things. So they are very emotive. So you need to start with creating that psychological safety. And what do I mean by that? This is a term that was coined by Professor Amy Edmondson from Harvard University, that a team is safe for interpersonal risk taking, that you can take risks, you can challenge each other, you will not be humiliated, or you will not be made to feel bad because you brought yourself to work, that you have challenged the norms. So when you create psychological safety, you are moving away from what we call artificial harmony, which is what I've seen many organizations. You find that if you haven't dealt with the concept of psychological safety, there's a lot of artificial harmony. We are in the same department. I can see somebody's not pulling their socks, they are not doing their job, and that impacts my job. And I don't want to challenge them because I said, it's not my job. They might take it personally. The more you keep quiet, you are moving towards what we call artificial harmony, which is not what we want. We actually want constructive engagement that is robust. But in order for you to engage like that. There needs to be safety. You need to know that you won't be fired for challenging your leader. You need to know that you won't be hated forever for raising a point that is not right in your department. You need to know that people won't take things personally and there's a grudge, So you have to work through the environment to create psychological safety.
It's complex, right? When we talk about
It is.
inclusion, really creating that inclusion and inclusive environment. But let me ask you, how then, in this context, how would you define inclusion then? And
Yes.
its impact on the employee. You have touched upon this, but just how would it really impact their performance, and what is
Yes.
inclusion for you?
Do you know why I like the fact that over the years we've now introduced the concept of inclusion? Because many years ago we were just talking about managing diversity, and people were talking numbers only, right? Now we've introduced inclusion, and why it's important. You might know Werner Mayer's statement that diversity is like being invited to the party,
Yes.
inclusion is being asked to dance. Because inclusion says, once I'm in your organization, how do I experience the culture? How do I experience the atmosphere? So in my company, we've actually over the years defined what inclusion is, and we've observed and we've seen what works. So inclusion, it's actually taking deliberate and decisive steps to ensure fair treatment, equitable access to resources and opportunity. It has to be deliberate and decisive. It's also being, if you're a leader, it's being constantly vigilant and looking out for the not so obvious. If I give an example, if I'm in a team, I'm running a meeting, and one of my team members is slowly becoming withdrawn. As a leader, I need to know, or even as colleagues, that part of our collective responsibility is to be vigilant and actually see that what is happening around us. If you see somebody slowly withdrawing, that reach out to them. So I need to be constantly vigilant as a leader, and look out for the not so obvious and be open to a variety of perspectives, even those that differ from mine. It's actively reaching out to the voices that are not normally listened to. I think we know in the workplace there's certain people that are more popular, some voices are more listened to than others. So here it's actively reaching out to the voices and inviting voices that are not normally listened to, and ensuring that everyone is allowed to bring their best to the workplace. There are 2 points though. These that I've mentioned are more like, what do I do as a leader? But inclusion is also a responsibility of those who seek to be included. I also need to ensure that I choose to include myself and I speak up when I feel not included. And it doesn't mean that by speaking up I'll always be included, but at least I have spoken up. I often give this example. Let's say in the team I'm the only one with a small baby, and my manager says every time for the past week or so, he says we have to come at 6:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock. I don't know what to do with my child. I don't know where to drop them, because even the childcare facilities are not opened at the time. I'm going through those challenges. Whereas if I decide to speak up and say to my team and say to my leader, to say, when you say we must be at work at 7 o'clock in the morning, please note that this is how it impacts me. I'm struggling with this. Sometimes by speaking up, people say, oh, we didn't know. Maybe you can come later, that you can work in your 1 hour later on. But they wouldn't know unless I speak up. So I also have a responsibility to speak up, so that inclusion becomes the responsibility of my manager, my peers, and myself.
That is so true. You have to at least voice what you're going through. Then only your voice will be heard. There are certain hidden barriers to inclusion, right? As you were talking about. What are those hidden barriers that we should be conscious of and we should be alert towards?
Yes, the serious hidden barriers to inclusion. In fact, there's a study conducted by Professor Naomi Eisenberger from University of California, that exclusion
Mm.
causes the same chemical reaction in the brain as physical pain. Okay? I want to start there first to say when in the studies that they've conducted, that when you look at the picture of the brain and you are taking a knife and scratching me here, the pain that I'm feeling here is in the same place in the brain as social pain.
Yeah.
Social pain meaning the pain of exclusion. So what we don't realize, and many of the things that have been reported around that, and people are not realizing how important it is, that being on the receiving end of a social snub or being excluded, especially in the team that you think I should be belonging in this team. And it works whether it's at home or whether it's at work. If it's in the broader family system, for some reason somebody who's being excluded, it will affect them the same way. But let's talk about the workplace now. If it's a team, it's a project team that I think I'm part of this team and I'm being excluded, that causes a cascade of emotional and cognitive consequences. And social exclusion leads to anger, anxiety, sadness, jealousy, and rage, a lot of negative emotions. So, and then it reduces, the studies have shown that it reduces performance on difficult intellectual tasks and can also contribute to aggression and poor impulse control. Why am I starting with exclusion? To answer your question, to say, therefore, the opposite, inclusion, is what we want to create so that people can show up where with their full potential. Where, if you look at how DEI is aligned to talent as well, or leadership development, that even if they are not managed by the same person, those two leaders must work together. Because if one person is busy working on talent development and talent management, and then there's instances of exclusion that are happening, it's the same people that you're talking about. So your talent strategy will be affected by repeated experiences of exclusion. So the hidden aspect of inclusion is that inclusion, when you create an inclusive culture, then it impacts on performance. People become innovative, creative, and they walk an extra mile, and they show up in such a way that they want to serve the customer better. How can I serve the customer better if I feel excluded? Myself at work. Often people say we must live our values, client centric or passion. There's different values that organizations have. But if those values are there on the wall, I am feeling excluded, I'm not feeling included, there is no way I'm going to serve the customer with passion or having client centricity, because I'm going through my own issues.
That is true. And that would definitely have an impact, direct impact on the performance of the organization as well. So it is absolutely imperative that we kind of focus on inclusion then, right?
Yeah.
So our context right now, I think, as we are with COVID and emerging out of COVID, with all of this, a lot of emphasis being given to inclusive employee experience as well, and how things have shaped now going forward in the future, what is our, and the fact that we are a very, very intersectional society right now, and there's increasing education, people are getting more aware, and I'd like to say that the power is going back to the people in every field that we're talking about. In that unique context that we are right now, right, what should be the focus of our attention when developing DEI and going forward with it?
What I have observed for the last 2 years or so of COVID is that during that time, people's values changed dramatically in terms of what employees expect from their organizations. And they expect things like, now suddenly the wellness strategy, people who used not to take that seriously. But now the whole area of wellness, that self-care becomes important because the high levels of depression and abuse that happened because of people working from home that we never even knew about. So how do organizations in their strategy ensure that your wellness strategy is integral to what you do? That employees, you can no longer count employees as if they're just a pair of hands. When we say, as other many companies say that our employees come first. What does it really mean? They must truly come first because now they are going through real challenges. So we need to be re-looking, reimagining what we mean moving forward. That what do we actually mean by a new way in which we need to work that is more inclusive. And other challenges have come up as well. Let me give you an example. We now do a lot of work online, right? One of the things I've observed when I do my Zooms, my Teams, and I've said to many leaders, you might think this is small, but this is real. They are because of the inequalities. COVID has shown a lot of the inequalities, people living in different regions, different whatever. We might have worked for the same organizations before, but our inequalities were not as pronounced as they are now. So people who are struggling, for example, with connectivity, with their bandwidth, with their whatever, and then you are joining I've seen it so many times. Someone joins the Zoom and then something happens, their bandwidth is weak, and people would roll their eyes and we do this. And I've often said, if I'm facilitating your team and this is what is happening, it shows that we are not even aware that inclusion is also the doing and the being. Because when you do that, you roll your eyes, you say, if it's a bandwidth where I live, that's not me. It's because where I am in terms of the location of my house, which is totally out of my control. And remember, this is systemic. I've often said, if I just use my country as an example, in terms of Group Areas Act, where people of color lived vis-a-vis where white people lived, as an example. Yes, now I live, because I'm a black middle class, I live in those suburbs, but the majority of black people still live in the townships because structurally, if you are to look at the spatial structuring, is that most people live in those areas. So all those residual barriers are impacting on them. I'm not feeling them now because I've moved away from that, but the majority of people are feeling it. So this thing is so interrelated. We need to talk about that and even pause for a moment saying, let us talk what is happening in the Zoom. Let's surface that. And people are often surprised that I didn't even think about it, that it could be an area of exclusion.
That is true. As you said, it's not doing, it's the being. You have to be inclusive, right? So it's everybody's responsibility. So if we were to redesign our DEI strategy, what is it that you would add or remove? Maybe you can give us some, share some practical tips from your book in this regard.
Yes. I think firstly, I would, I use an example in my book of a three-legged pot, that if you want two models that are important, if you want a real sustainable integrated approach to diversity and inclusion, you need to look at it at three levels. Firstly, the one leg of a three-legged pot, the one leg is looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion at an intra-personal level. Very important to say, how do I hold up the mirror? So as opposed to just putting together just a strategy on a docket, how do I hold up the mirror as leaders to recognize that you yourself have to do your work at an intrapersonal, and which is what we call the self, and then interpersonal, which is work one-on-one or as teams or as groups, like if we are in a workshop, that's interpersonal. But then that all falls under one leg. The next leg, which people often omit to look at, is diversity and inclusion at a systemic and organizational level. What do I mean by that? You look, for example, if I've done work at an interpersonal and we respect each other, you and I, let's say we've worked together, we respect each other, We joined the organization at the same time. And then this is where the systemic leg comes in. And we are even friends because we've done very good work. And then the systemic, let's say tomorrow I discover, we report to the same person, tomorrow I discover that our manager pays you 30% more than me. Do you know that it wouldn't matter how much work we did at the one leg, at the interpersonal? It's going to impact because at a systemic level, and you might, first of all, this is important for me to say, you might not agree with the fact that you earn 30% more than me. You might not even know because we don't show each other our salary slips. You might not even know. But let's say now that I've discovered why it's important for the next leg is that the organization cannot just expect people to go through workshops. They must ensure that policies, systems, procedures, and practices are also looked at. Do we have policies that are cutting edge? Do we have systems that are equitable? Do we have practices that are fair? So you find that, yes, people have gone through their dialogue in their workshops, but the practices, the implementation of the policies is not in alignment. So when you put together a strategy, you need to ensure that do we look at policy systems practices as well. And then the last leg of the three legs, the last leg is to look at diversity and inclusion at a stakeholder level. And what we mean at the stakeholder level, companies don't just exist so that employees can be happy. No, they exist in order to serve whatever their mandate is, to serve the community, to serve their clients or their customers. So it's important to say, what is the case for change? The reputation of the company matters. So the expectations of the stakeholders, and these could be shareholders, these could be potential employees that are not yet there. It could be your current clients, or what are their needs? How are they experiencing the organization? So first of all those three legs, and what is the organization doing in the community to say that we are not just driven by profits, we are also driven by ensuring that we are a good corporate citizen. So the three legs are important. That's the one thing that I'll ensure it's in the strategy. So because if it's not there, you are just going to be focusing on, when you think about diversity and inclusion, it's just numbers. You need to get 30% of women, 20% of people of color or people with disabilities, whatever your targets could be. And that is actually deficient because it's not complete in that sense.
That is so true. And I think that's why we take one step forward, but we sometimes have to move back three steps. And so unless it is a systemic approach and it's the holistic thing, that the way we look at it, it'll be hard to make a progress.
When you redesign, is to look at the head, heart, and hands, because at the head level, it's intellectual buy-in. If we look at what happens last year during George Floyd, many companies wrote statements of support. For example, many countries, it happened globally, statements of support towards Black Lives Matter or statements of condemnation towards the police, whichever angle they took. But then some stopped there. This is why it's important to align the head, the heart, and the hands. They stop there. It's good that you send a statement. So what? After that, the heart says, yes, now that I have said the right things, now that my insight is correct, that I need to at least acknowledge, am I living that? Am I also connected to the heart? Because that's where now inclusion is touching the heart. Am I connected to the heart? That and that's where emotions also live. And then the hands is implementation. I can have as much passion, I can say all the beautiful things. If that doesn't translate to really making real change of culture shift, making real change for your demographics, real change to ensure that there's inclusion, then it means you are forgetting the hands. So the hands is implementation. Aligning the head, the heart, and the hands often will help you with your strategy.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the head, heart, and hands model, a holistic approach. That is the way forward, and that is when we will actually make real shift and progress. Thank you so much, Nene. That was great. And your book is something I think which will help everyone anybody who's
Yes.
practicing and otherwise. So where are we? So it would be available on Amazon. We can just
Yes,
go
it's
ahead and
available on Amazon. Definitely, if you just type the title of the book, A Journey of Diversity and Inclusion in South Africa. I promise you all the tips at the end of every chapter, there are tips and guidelines. The tips and guidelines are global.
Yes, I think
Yeah,
so too, because inclusion it's a global concept.
it
It's
is.
something which you all have to practice. Thank you, Nene. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Taruna. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.